boys? What's good? It's Herm. We're here today to talk about the Houston Rockets because their core is getting crazy, especially after the draft, which was on Thursday, where they added two guys who were pretty much both viewed as top 5 prospects to a team that already has a bunch of young talent. So we're going to get into how crazy the young core is, kind of what lineups we could expect to see them run next season, and then what are realistic expectations for this team next year, as well as this offseason and guys they could target. So we're going to talk about a lot of Rocket stuff today, but before we do, think about subscribing. It's free, it's easy, and if you don't like the content, as unsubscribe later, that's fine. But without further ado, let's just get right into it, starting with the draft. So the Rockets were projected to be deciding between two players with the number 4 pick for most of the pre-draft process. It was either going to be Ahmed Thompson, a point guard, or Cam Whitmore, a wing. A lot of people said they might go Whitmore because James Harden was believed to be coming back. Now most people think Harden's going back to Philly, so they end up taking Ahmed Thompson, the point guard, out of the overtime elite at number 4. But on draft night, Houston got both of them. They selected Ahmed at 4, and then due to injury concerns and some disappointing workouts and interviews, Cam Whitmore fell all the way to pick 20, despite being a nearly consensus top 5 talent. So a lot of people thought he could go as high as number 4, and then all of a sudden he's sliding down the board. It's not just a fall, it was kind of a free fall for Cam Whitmore, and despite being viewed that highly talent wise, he went all the way down to 20, and the Rockets said, hey, why not, we'll pick him here. With the addition of these two elite young talents to the already impressive young core, the team's future outlook is starting to look crazy because there's just so much young talent on this team, and I want to talk about all the impressive young guys that I think are worth talking about individually. We're going to talk about each of them in detail, and it's going to be 7 guys. The Rockets have 7 young players who are very interesting and have high upside, and that's not even counting guys like Josh Christopher, KJ Martin, Ty Washington, who I'm not going to talk about those guys individually, but also are interesting young pieces as well. The Rockets are stacked with young talent. It's kind of a talent overload, but let's get into them. So let's take a look at Houston's young pieces, breaking down each interesting young piece, and they're kind of in descending order of how important I think they are to the team, the level of players they are, stuff like that. So that means we're starting off with Jalen Green, the former number 2 overall pick, and I believe the 2021 NBA draft, been in the league for 2 years now, is an absolute bucket. This dude has been a scorer since he walked into the league. I think in year 1 he averaged about 19, and then this season he averaged 22 points per game. He's an overhated player. A lot of people say he's just like an Instagram hooper or a TikTok hooper or whatever you want to say, but he's a good player. He's a very good player. He's only 21 years old, and despite the efficiency concerns, he's not off track. I did a video already talking about how I think he's the most overhated player in the league. When you compare his stats at his age to other great shooting guards in the game now, like Anthony Edwards, like Devin Booker, like Zach LaVine, a lot of the numbers are super similar, so I actually don't think Jalen Green is off pace at all. I think he's going to be an all-star in this league, and I think he gets a lot more hate than he should, just because the Rockets haven't been very good. It's similar, we saw Devin Booker, a lot of people said he was a empty stats guy and a bad team, but has taken his team to the finals now. People don't say that anymore. People love Anthony Edwards, but Jalen Green should be viewed in the same conversation. He's really that good. He's going to be an all-star. The efficiency is a problem, like I said, but it's not really significantly worse than any of the other great young shooting guards were at his age, so if he continues at the right trajectory, he should be able to fix that. Last season, averaged 22 points per game, 4 assists, and 4 rebounds. Pretty good stat line overall, but wasn't necessarily contributing to winning. So is he an empty stats guy or an impactful winner? That'll be the biggest question with him. We saw guys like Devin Booker, even Trae Young to a certain extent, kind of turn it around and really show that they can put up great numbers on good teams. But we've seen other guys like Bradley Beal, who hasn't done it in a long time, or even I don't know, I'm trying to think of guys here who put up quote-unquote empty numbers. I think the whole idea of empty numbers is kind of ridiculous. I think you're playing NBA-level competition, and if you can put up these numbers, it speaks to how good you are. But Bradley Beal isn't a 31-point-per-game guy. Probably even in a better situation, Damian Lillard isn't a guy who needs to be putting up 33 points per game, but he did it pretty efficiently, so it depends on what you want to think, but I don't think Jalen Green would be one of those guys that just puts up numbers that don't impact winning. I think think he's a very talented player and a very natural scorer and just gets too much hate. Their second guy, though, let's talk about Alperen Sengun, center. A lot of people would call him the next Nikola Jokic. I've seen a graphic. It was like the evolution of Charizard or something, which is a Pokemon. It had Sengun as the first level, Domantas Sabonis is the second level, and then Jokic is the third level, which I really like. I thought it was a good description of great passing big men in today's game, guys who are really great offensively. Maybe none of them are elite defensive players, but as we saw in the playoffs, Jokic is pretty passable defensively, and I think Sengun, with the unique kind of skill set he provides, is on a similar trajectory. Do I think he's going to be Nikola Jokic? No, I think there's only one Jokic, and I think it's super hard to reach that level, but I don't think it's impossible that Sengun is a kind of perennial all-star in one of the best centers in the league because he's that gifted offensively. He had an impressive year 2 jump compared to what he did in year 1, but I still thought the coaching was holding him back. Wasn't a lottery pick, was traded for, I believe, by the Rockets. They traded back into the first round to get him. Was an elite passing big through his few years. Only 4 assists per game, but for a center, that's very good. And he should have had the ball in his hands more, because when the ball is in his hands, he's great at setting up other people, whether they're cutting, or is very good at the dribble handoff, a lot like we see Sabonis do a ton in Sacramento. But on top of that, is a more traditional big in a sense as well, because his post moves are very good. He's worked a little bit with Hakeem. I think that's been overstated a little bit, but he has worked out with him. I think he's trying continually to get better footwork in the post, and is showing in the games. Last season, averaged 15 points and 9 rebounds, already a very good stat line with 4 assists, but as he continues to grow, I think he could pretty easily be like 20, 12, and 7 pretty soon. So Sengun is a guy who is going to be a very good player. Will he thrive with a better coach who can showcase his talents? I thought the old coach, I'm blanking on his name here, but Stephen Silas. I think Stephen Silas to some extent was holding him back. Didn't put the ball in his hands enough. It felt like at times didn't give him enough minutes. Didn't run enough action for Sengun. He's a guy who should have the ball in his hands. Just because he's a 7-footer doesn't mean he has to be always camped in the post. I think he makes his teammates better when the ball is in his hands, and really is able to show how good he is as a talent. And with Ime Udoka, I think we'll see that better on display. Third, let's talk about this year's number 4 pick, Ahmed Thompson. Was a guy who didn't play in college, did play in the overtime elite, but was great there, but the competition wasn't quite as good. But I think some of the competition concerns are a little unwarranted, because they have played overseas. They had like a little circuit with Overtime Elite where they went and played some overseas teams and other professional leagues, and both of the Thompson twins were still great. And they played in the basketball tournament, TBT, which is basically all former NBA and great college players, and they were both very good in that as well. So I don't think the competition level is a huge concern. I think they're going to be great NBA players. I don't think they were just feasting against bad competition. He's a 99th percentile athlete, one of the best athletes we've had come out in a long time. Has been called Skinny Zion or Tall Ja Morant because the athleticism is on those levels, ridiculous levels of athleticism. 6'7", 210 pounds, is kind of lean for being as tall as he is, but is a big point guard and really gives the Rockets good size to be a big team moving forward, which I like for them. I think getting a big, tall point guard can be super valuable for you defensively, just because height is a big deterrent for the other team, and with his athleticism, I think he projects to be a very good defender, although his brother Asar is the better defender of the two right now. But per 40 in the Overtime Elite, a lot of guys in college are playing 40-minute games, so I wanted to flex this to 40 to really show what he was putting up, and it would be 24 points per game, 9 assists, and 3.5 steals. He dominated that league. He was phenomenal there. Although the competition, yes, wasn't as good, I still think he took advantage and really didn't play down to the competition, which is something I was impressed by. Can he be a full-time point guard at the NBA level? We've seen him play some point guard. He feels like a guy who's going to be a point guard, but the handle needs to tighten up a little bit. I think the passing vision is there, but can he be a 100% all-the-time point guard? I don't know that he needs to be, because he has Sengun on his team, because they have KPJ off the bench, who I really like. But that'll be the biggest question, is if he can really be a full-time point guard, or if he's destined to be more of a very good wing. Fourth, let's talk about Jabari Smith Jr., who was last year's third overall pick, was an all-rookie selection this past season. Great defender already in year one, kind of came out and was clamps right from the start, which was something you don't see very often. You don't usually see rookie defenders who are really, really solid, but Jabari was that. He was great as a defender last year on a team that really lacked defensive help and kind of struggled defensively at a lot of times. He wasn't an issue. He was very good on that end, and I'd probably argue he was the Rockets' best defender last season, either him or Jayshawn Tate, whichever guy you want to say, but Jabari was great defensively last year. He has shooting upside. Coming out of college, was viewed as a floor spacing guy, like a 3-and-D plus kind of player. The shooting last year wasn't great. It was kind of up and down, but he did get better as the year went along. For the whole of last season, he averaged 13 points, 7 rebounds, and about an assist and a half. Not a great passer. That's not really what you're asking him to do, but pretty good rebounder for his size. He's not massive in terms of height or frame, but does a pretty good job at rebounding on top of being not necessarily a natural scorer in terms of creating his own shot, but is great if being set up by others, and I think Sengun and Amen allow him to showcase that more next season. But is he more of what we saw in March/April or what we saw in the early season? Because later on in the season, he was averaging like 18-19 in the last couple months, but earlier on in the year it was like sub 10, and the stats like the shooting splits were really bad. I'm betting it's more what we saw towards the end, and I think he's gonna just continue to get better, and is a guy who still has very high upside, but disappointed a little bit, I'd say, in year one. But Jabari is still gonna be a good player in my opinion. At number 5, we have Cam Whitmore, small forward. Was the 20th overall pick in this year's NBA draft, but was a top 5 talent. At least I would say he's a top 5 talent. I've had him, I think, either 4th or 5th in terms of where I was ranking him. But he's phenomenal, man. He's so good offensively. He's so good athletically. I just really like Cam Whitmore. I know the knees are the biggest concern. Those are the injury concerns there, is with the knees. People and teams specifically, when looking at the medicals, thought that they could fail him specifically for the knees, but it didn't seem like any team failed him. But it did take him off a lot of teams' boards. His kind of stoic way of being too, he's not a guy who's going to be smiling all the time. He kind of has a resting serious face, if you want to call it that. And I think that kind of off-put people in interviews, but is a really nice guy when you get to know him, is what I've heard. His teammates at Villanova really liked him. Everyone liked him. But there are also some rumors going around that the Nova coach was kind of bad-mouthing Cam Whitmore to NBA scouts, which isn't what you want to see. But talent-wise, he's so good. He's a phenomenal athlete. Isn't the level of athlete that Amen is, but is a very good one in his own right. Good shot creation ability in terms of getting his own shot off the dribble. Some of his shooting splits last year didn't look great, but it's because he was forcing shots a little bit. I think you get him more in an NBA rhythm. You get more natural shots, more kind of open shots in terms of not taking contested jumpers quite as often, and I think his shooting splits will go up. He's 6'6", 235 pounds, big physical presence, and was one of the youngest players in the draft, still only 18 years old, and is just going to be great, man. I love Cam Whitmore. I think he's a guy who's very unlikely to fail. When you look at him, he just looks like a guy who's going to be an NBA star because of the physical build. Kind of feels kind of reminiscent of Carmelo Anthony build-wise, but a lot of people have compared him to guys like Miles Bridges and Josh Smith because of the slightly undersized type of power forward, but super athletic, and the vertical makes up for that kind of stuff. But can he be the next MPJ story? MPJ was a guy who was also a top 5 talent in his draft class, slipped down to either 13th or 14th in his draft because of injury concerns as well. It was his back, and was the second best player probably in game 5. I think they won in 5. Game 5 of the NBA Finals, he was the second best player in the closing game, and was a contributor throughout the finals due to his rebounding. The shot wasn't there quite as much throughout the finals as it was the rest of the playoffs, but the point is that he was a starter and a very high-level contributor in the NBA Finals because the team was willing to take a risk on him, and the Rockets took a risk on Cam Whitmore, and I think he's a guy who's very unlikely to fail in the NBA, and teams just overthink things. He feels like a guy we're going to look back back and be like, wow, those teams were just stupid. Like, why didn't they take Cam Whitmore? Why did they think about it so much? Why did they make themselves doubt him? He's a great talent, and he projects to be a very high-level NBA player. Next, we got Kevin Porter Jr., their 6th super high-talent young guy. Shifted from shooting guard to point guard, came in as a shooting guard or small forward with the Cavs. Ends up not being with the Cavs due to some kind of personality and off-court stuff, but ends up with the Rockets and really turns it around. He's improving as a passer. I don't think the point guard experiment has failed. A lot of people might tell you it has. I think that's bogus. I think he was pretty good. As a natural scorer as well, just kind of a walking bucket. Probably not quite to the level of Jalen Green, but before his injury last year was a 20-point per game scorer as well. And maybe he's not a great starting point guard in the NBA, but he will be a top end sixth man. Kind of like what we've seen from Jordan Clarkson over the years, feels like what we'll get from Kevin Porter Jr. 19 points per game last year, 5 rebounds, and almost 6 assists. Just super good. Another guy who's very overhated, just like Jalen Green. I think they have 2 great players in the backcourt already and just added another one in Ahmed Thompson. Like Thompson, though, he does have questions of whether he's going to be a long-term point guard, but I think, again, playing with Sengun allows these guys who maybe aren't quite as traditional point guards to be point guards on an NBA level and with the NBA team. Next, let's talk about Tari, Eason, the last guy I want to talk about specifically in detail, but was an all-rookie selection last year after going mid-first round. It kind of started off with the Summer League last year because people watched him out in the Summer League, and people are like, oh, wow, like this guy is a great athlete. He is a top-end hustler, gives all effort all the time, and is just a guy that you want to have on your team. That was the overwhelming kind of takeaway from Summer League last year, is people love this dude. He's a fan favorite. He's awesome to watch and has great upside as well. Is a very good athlete in terms of both getting down the floor and verticality, and a very high level hustle player. 9 points per game, 6 rebounds, and just over 1 assist as a rookie. Does he have all-star upside? I don't know if I'm sure it's quite that high, but I think he's going to be a very, very good role player in the NBA, and even if he doesn't start for this Rockets team, he's going to make an impact going forward over the next few seasons. Now let's talk about their projected lineup. We've talked about a bunch of these guys individually, but I think they probably run out a starting 5 of Ahmed Thompson, Jalen Green, Cam Whitmore, Jabari Smith Jr, and Alperen Sengun. This is at least before free agency. Of course, if they get a big free agent, they would slot in probably to a starting spot, but right now this is, I think, what it would look like. You could say Kevin Porter Jr. starts and both Thompson and Green move down, and Cam Whitmore gets pulled out of the starting lineup. That'd be fine, but those 5 that I named as starters and Kevin Porter Jr. feel like a pretty clear top 6 for this team. And they have good depth. I think Ty Washington is an interesting young point guard who could develop. Josh Christopher is good. Hopefully he gets more minutes under the new coaching staff. It felt like Silas didn't like him, but when Christopher was on the floor, he was a pretty good player. Is a pretty natural scorer himself. KJ Martin is a restricted free agent who I would try to bring back. I really like him as both a defender and a highlight reel dunker kind of guy. Jayshawn Tate as well as a backup small forward. You have Tari Eason as your backup 4, and then you have Usman Garuba, who's kind of a foreign development piece who continues to get better as a backup 5. And despite this team being super young, all of these guys are basically, I think all of them might be 25 or below. I'm trying to think of who the oldest is. It's probably KJ Martin is probably the oldest guy here. Really no veterans, so there's going to be a point to bring in veterans in free agency. I could tell you that right now. They had a few veterans last year, but basically all of them are free agents, as well as they traded away Eric Gordon. So a lot of their talent is young, but they have really, really good young talent. And now let's talk about their head coach, because their head coach is going to be great for bringing this team forward and helping them take a leap. Has been 51-31 as his career as a head coach in 1 season for the Celtics for a .622 winning percentage. Was a finals appearance in his only season as the head coach. 45 years old, still pretty young in terms of coaches. Was a 9-year assistant coach, so he does have pretty good experience. And 2-time Eastern Conference Coach of the Month in his 1 season as the head coach. 4th in Coach of the Year voting. Convinced LaMarcus Aldridge to sign with the San Antonio Spurs, so he does have some pull with free agents, so I think the Rockets will go out and get one. Is known to be well liked by players and is a great defensive coach, which is huge for Houston because that's what they need the most. but two guys that they brought in, Ahmed Thompson and Cam Whitmore, both project to be very good defenders because of their athleticism and because of their size. So if he can really get the most out of his guys, I think all of a sudden you could be looking at a competent team because all of the young offensive talent, and if they can be a competent defensive team, at least towards the middle of the pack, I think it'll really help what this team is going to be. But what to expect during the offseason and next season? On the low end, let's say they don't get some huge free agent, I think it's probably 30-ish wins, miss the play-in tournament, but they show a lot of growth because they still have all these young guys on their team. They're super young, like I said. I believe this would be the youngest team in the league if they didn't bring in some older free agents. So that wouldn't be a disappointment to me if they got 30-ish wins. I don't think it's a team that is going to be the absolute bottom of the barrel again. I don't think Houston wants to do that. I think they want to get better, and I think they will, at least to some extent. And on the high end, assuming they get a higher piece free agent, as well as good impact from the new head coach in Ime Udoka, you're probably looking at 48 to 50 wins, and a team finishes 5th or 6th in the West. That's kind of my idea if James Harden comes to town still. I think James Harden signing is unlikely, but they're expected to get a large money free agent. I think that's fair to expect that. They're rumored to be interested in a ton of guys like James Harden, as well as Kyrie Irving and Fred VanVleet. So they're looking at star-level point guards as well as wings, and I think they should try to grab a key free agent wing like Jeremy Grant or even Dylan Brooks, just guys who are elite defensively and could really help you on that end while providing some level of scoring, Jeremy Grant being a more consistent and efficient scorer. But on top of a guard, I think you should get a very good wing because they're going to have like $60 million in cap space. So if they can convince people to come to town, this team could be much better than you think pretty early on. They have 3 potential 20-point per game scorers among their young guys already in Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., and Alperen Sengun, because Green and Porter were basically both 20-point per game scorers last season. Green was at 22, and Porter, because of his injuries, dropped below 20, but Sengun averaged about 15 last year, and with the right coaching staff who knows how to utilize him a little better, I think he could be a 20-point per game scorer as well. Jabari doesn't feel like one who would average that next year, and I don't think Amen or Cam Whitmore would average that as rookies. So I think those 3 would be your only guys there. Outside of later free agent additions, you have to try to retain KJ Martin if possible. He's going to come at a relatively cheap price, and is a guy who's a very good role player. A lot of teams would like to have him, but Houston has been investing into him and should try to keep him around. If they're on the higher end of wins, expect an all-star, likely one of Green / Sengun, and probably if Harden's there, Harden would be an all-star. Probably Kyrie would, and Fred VanVleet if the team was overperforming. But then one of the young guys might make the all-star team as soon as next season as well. But this Rockets team is stacked with young talent. It's a young talent overload because of these 2 new guys in Ahmed Thompson and Cam Whitmore, who both have all-star upside. So to add 2 guys like that is super valuable. You have Jalen Green, you have Sengun, Jabari again, I really like, Kevin Porter Jr. off the bench, Tari, Eason. That's already 7 guys, and again, that's not talking about guys like Josh Christopher, Ty Washington, Usman Garuba, even Jayshawn Tate, who's not super old himself. There's just a ton of young talent on this team, and it's going to be super fun to watch what it becomes, because I like a lot of these guys, and I think they're doubted too much. I think a lot of their young guys are underrated, and the talent is through the roof. So if there's a coach who can bring it together, Ime Udoka would be a great candidate to do that, and I'm just excited to see what they do next season. But let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think of the Rockets' young core, what you think of their draft picks, and just everything with the Rockets, and just your thoughts on it. But that's going to be it for me today. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Think about subscribing, again, on the road to 9,000. But that's going to be it for me. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.